welcome. We are so glad that you're joining us here tonight. We're going to try to make this a kind of a more quiet space, a kind of a less rancor space, kind of a place where we can maybe figure out what just happened. Because I don't know about you, but I'm slightly overwhelmed. I'm just slightly overwhelmed. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Let me please introduce you to the wonderful people that we've gathered here tonight. Our purpose tonight, by the way, is to talk to teachers and parents, all the educators out there, and you if you're a lifelong learner, because we want to talk about how do we talk about this? How do we not devolve into rancor? How do we not devolve into just partisan discourse? And how can we look at this and figure out what happened? Before we're basing most of our discussion and some of our solutions as well on thegreatdebates.org, which is a curriculum that the Museum of Broadcast Communication has developed to really help navigate these times. One of the things that we know is that when we say at any given time that this is a unique situation, there are actually things in history that correspond. There are actually places that we can look to find solutions and to find how other people navigated prior to us. And so today, and by the way, before I just go off of this, I need to thank a couple people, the people who helped us get this website up, people like Gretchen Patrick, who is a PhD student at Lewis University, worked with Carol Summerfield and myself to really build this curriculum. There are 8 modules up there. There's a 100-year timeline of all of the times when media disrupted the presidential campaigns. Because if you think about it, whenever the media, whether it's radio, television, or digital, evolves, its iterations actually cause major disruption, because they become the technology that we use. And nowhere does that seem to be more are we able to see that more than the 4-year cycle of presidential elections. So Gretchen Patrick, thank you. Andrea Stone, who helped us write some of these pieces, definitely wrote many of the pieces that we have up there. Thank you so very much. David Plyer, thank you, our board chairman, for all the work, and your design team that you helped us, that helped put this together. And tonight, thank you, Fritz Goldman, who is our technician tonight, doing everything to get us to you. Tonight, our panelists include 3 amazing people. Deborah Douglas, who is a veteran journalist. She is now the Distinguished Visiting Professor at DePauw University. She has also been the managing editor of the MLK 50 Justice Through Journalism Project, which is phenomenal. You need to look that up. She served as editor-in-chief of the Sun-Times Red Streak edition. She's also been a trainer in the Op-Ed Project across the globe and has appeared on CNN, the BBC, ABC7, WGN Radio, and V103. Deborah, welcome tonight. So glad to see you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Carol Summerfield, who is the co-author of the museum's Great Debate curriculum, and she is a member of our board. Thank you so much. But she's also a person who can be defined outside of the museum. She has been a strategist. She has been an educator for her career. She specializes in museums, and she's currently executive director of the Lake Bluff Lake Forest History Center. Thank you so very much for being with us, Carol.
Thank you.
And thanks, Carol. And finally, Dennis Cremin, we are so happy that you are here tonight. You are you already know who you are, but let me tell the rest of the world that you're a professor of history at Lewis University, where you also chair the department and the History Center director. And you're also an author of The Grant Park, The Evolution of Chicago's Front Yard. So we've got people here who understand the world of journalism and who understand the history that we live in. And we're looking at this through the lens of critical thinking, media literacy, and civic engagement. So let's just take a minute before we talk about the strategies to deal with this, to react. What do you think? What happened tonight? What can you say? Anybody? Deborah?
The agent of chaos was on the loose, and that's not a partisan statement, but the debate is about what people said, and it's also about what people did, and the idea of creating chaos and not allowing any one idea to land or for any death to occur proved to be a winning recipe, I'm afraid.
It did. It seemed like I mean, what happens with these debates is we are declared a winner and a loser, and I get a feeling that we're a loser in all of this. Carol, what about you?
Well, it was fascinating. So I debated in high school, and I realized debate has changed as a structure. But my thought was the baseline of understanding how to create sort of a narrative of give and take, of looking at point counterpoint, just evaporated. And if they were in high school and you were grading them, they would have failed. That the idea of navigating cogent construction of an argument or dissection of somebody else's argument wasn't there. And it sort of makes it more problematic for a teacher to teach that, because that ability to pick apart what you're saying and really look at the realities of it gets lost. As Deborah said, it's you foment chaos and you don't really have a thread to build off of.
But on the other hand, I think that that's a great jumping off point for a teacher to basically say, I mean, we're headed towards middle and high school students in some of the information that we're disseminating, and I believe that it's safe to say a majority of that population likes it very much when adults don't really live up to it and when they can step in and say what's wrong. So, Dennis, how would you characterize what you saw tonight?
It was tough. I think Chris Wallace probably came off as the winner. He worked very hard to kind of create a level playing field. The work of the Museum of Broadcast Communication is really important here, because in terms of media literacy, what I saw was a seasoned reality TV star who is the President of the United States, um, uh, using all of those traits of kind of moving from calm to crisis to landing all of your punches. And so, in that way, Joe Biden had a very hard time um, uh, coming back from all of that.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very difficult for somebody who is used to being a senator and who is used to being in that. What I think people don't remember about the Senate is so filled with decorum. I recognize the gentleman from, and all of these other arcane ways to talk about that are still observed today, right? And so, coming from that background, it's definitely a polar opposite, and I don't necessarily think that that is the best way to communicate either, because it doesn't really get in there to get the points made. But
I
again,
disagree that Chris Wallace did a good job, though. He did a terrible job. Actually, any public school teacher who has ever had to corral 35 kids, 35 or more children in a classroom who are being unruly and won't listen could have done a better job than Chris Wallace did. It was terrible.
so I do think that he knew what he was getting into. He's interviewed the president. He knew that the president would come in and that his MO is to interrupt and his MO is to disrupt. And it is to try to make sure that, there is, as you well characterized it, Deborah, chaos. And so I think that there, other than can he finish, there could have been a better strategy for how do we do this.
Well,
Carol, what about you?
someone
Go ahead.
who's adept at both code switching and code. You have to be able to code switch and then also like play the dozens at the same time. And Chris Wallace doesn't have any of the ability to play the dozens in his blood anywhere. Because if we're going to have a reality show star and a veteran statesman on the stage, you need to be able to switch between those two kinds of personalities and energies. We didn't bring any of those skills to the Q&A.
Yeah, it doesn't bode well for the next two, that's for darn sure. We have a question, by the way. What was okay, there we go, just a minute. What was the right format for this debate? What sort of format changes can we expect to see going forward to support more civil discourse? In other words, let's think about what did we learn from this and what could happen in the next debate. I'm hard put to see. My husband and I were watching this together, and he said the same thing that you said, Deborah, that Chris Wallace wasn't doing a good job, and so I tried to think of what was it that anybody could do to do a good job on this?
Well, I think that there are structural things that you could do. And again, I realize that this sort of lends itself to treating people as if they're not professionals. But after this one, I think that we're in that game. And that is you mute the other mic. One of the things that makes it effective is that we can hear everybody talking. And so if you're going to give somebody 2 minutes, mute the other mic. Then you get your 2 minutes, uninterrupted 2 minutes. Or they're just structural things that you could do that would allow people to finish a thought. And I think that the open aspect of it, I think that one of the things that they're going to have to do is just sort of require them to respond just to the moderator. And the moderator can reiterate, this is what we heard. Do you want to respond to that point? But to allow them to sort of go at each other in open discussion is where it became just talking over each other. And there was little salient sort of narrative that came out of that.
Yeah, and I also think, can I say, I think this is actually a good discussion to have in the classroom. What could have been done better? What is it that would have allowed us to hear these individuals and would have? And Dennis, what do you think? Where do you think they can go with this for the next one or two?
Yeah, I think Carol has a great idea, and also Deb also brings on a great point. I think that thinking back on a precedent of somebody who spoke this way. It's kind of the group debates going back to Ross Perot, and again sending people back to the greatdebates.org and thinking about looking at some of these models that have existed in the videos from the past.
And I think the other thing is we are very adamant about having a split screen. Like right now, we're having all four of us on the screen. That's fine. I love that. But in a split screen like this, what it does allow, it has given us those moments in past debates, like George Bush looking at his watch, like Vice President Gore rolling his eyes. And so it's given us information as voters. But I think maybe in this debate, to have the camera on one person who's on the screen when they're doing their 2 minutes, as opposed to seeing the reactions from the other person. Yeah. Deborah, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Well, no, I was thinking it would be great to have a panel of moderators, because the chaotic nature of it really set a rhythm, and so it had a choreography to it. And if you could break up the choreography by having two other personalities on the panel of moderators, Chris brings a certain kind of gravitas to the fore. But if you had some other people who present in different kinds of ways, who could just sort of cut through it, it would break up the rhythm that was set by that chaos.
Yeah, because the chaos started right away. You just jumped right in, erupting.
Well, and it was interesting because one of the things I watched for was how were they coached? What were they told to do? Because I think, again, this is one of the things that as a teacher, you can have students look at, what do you think the direction was that was given to them? And Biden had a really interesting technique where he would literally turn and talk to the camera. You, the people. He clearly had been trained to do that, and he did it over and over and over again. It would be interesting to see how that gets interpreted, whether or not that becomes a positive, that he sort of, in order to eliminate the chaos around him, he just spoke directly into the camera. And then for Trump, it's looking at the fact that it is clear that he was coached to interrupt, to break, to make noise, to challenge, to have these little sort of asides in there, because I think that it worked effectively for him, for his audience against Hillary. And again, to Dennis's point, when you go back and you look at some of the previous debates, it is clear when like Reagan was sort of trained on how to speak the same way, there you go again, that they had catchphrases that came across as improvisational, but were in fact not.
But I do think we heard a little bit in the news about how they were prepping for this, didn't we? Did any of you read all that, or that Trump was basically saying his back and forth at news conferences was his training, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking that in terms of engaging students around this particular event and subsequent debates, there are lots of situations that crop up in the life of children that lend themselves to deconstruction and comparison with what happened here. What do you do when you're on the basketball court, or when you're playing football, or when you're talking to your friends at the lunch table and something gets out of hand? So,
Right.
I mean, because it was very, very childlike.
It was very childlike. It was very, what's the old knock knock joke? Knock knock, who's there?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting moo. I mean, I have to say that was one of my favorite jokes. But but it did feel like interrupting cow throughout the whole thing. That it was just, and it was, and you, amidst it all, you did hear these things that just your eyebrows went up when Biden said, "Look at this clown," and shut up, stupid. That's that again. Deborah, you brought up the playground. That was, that felt, you did. I don't even know if we were allowed to do that on the playground, at least when the teachers were around. Dennis, what do you think would be any other takeaways that we could take into the classroom, at least from the tenor of everything?
I keep on thinking about the rich materials that are on the website, and the one that addresses media disruption. That's mainly about change of delivery, and we have this phrase, "He's the commander in tweet." He's really taken over social media, and you're absolutely right. One of the moments that kind of shifted for me was, and I wrote it down. "Do you have any idea what this clown is doing?" Was what Biden said at one point. And then the other one was that seemed to stick was on the topic of race, and Trump repeating the term super predator, super predator, super predator. Those are the kind of sound bites that seem to resonate in this moment right now. And I think using the lesson plans to kind of organize your thinking so that you can see and maybe predict how to get better messages out, and really show critical thinking skills.
So
Well, the
I
problem
was
with that is
one.
that they equated law enforcement or the need for policing with race. That's not the only thing that counts for that particular category of inquiry. So the answers are racist in and of themselves. So you can unpack that.
No, that's a great point. That's a totally great point. They went, and they actually, when we were talking about law enforcement, went right into race there as well. So it was overlapping, and Chris Wallace kept saying, we're going to do race later," and it some of it was unfathomable, the way the stereotypes were flying. We do have a question: was Trump coached to interrupt, or is that actually his style? Anybody want to take that one?
I think that I think they probably understood that that was going to be his instinct, but I think that to some extent it was more focused. That, unlike 4 years ago, where he really wasn't coached all that much before he debated Hillary, I think that one of the things they looked at were what are the predictable ways in which he's going to want to behave, and how do we hone it so that it plays more to his advantage. So I do think that he was, in fact, coached to interrupt, really specifically with shorter things, the wrong, that's not true, that sort of response.
And I
I
think,
also,
sorry, I was just going to say, I think that if his goal was, and part of his goal here tonight that we've been told, is that to throw Biden off his game and to make Biden seem befuddled, I think that strategy works.
I don't think that worked at all. I actually don't think he ever came across as befuddled. I think that was one of the things where Biden was able to really maintain sort of a focus on the narrative that he wanted to put forward, which is, again, I think the turning away from the conversation, directing it toward the camera, was really specifically designed to keep him on task. But I wanted to hook on something that Dennis had said, and I also think that it's a really interesting thing to, again, look at historically, and that is the cycle of respect that goes into treating a president, and the denigration that takes place. Sam Donaldson, an old journalist, really solid journalist, wrote a book called, I think it was called "Wait a Minute, Mr. President." It was something where he was, or just "Hold on just a second, Mr. President," which he never said, but he had this reputation of actually challenging presidents quite directly when he was interviewing them as a White House correspondent. And it was new. It was a new way of confronting people about whether or not they were telling the truth. And I think about that from 30 years ago, 25 years ago, to where we are today, where in fact, during a debate, you can turn to the president of the United States and call him a clown. And it won't even make headlines tomorrow. And I think that there are some really interesting sort of evolutionary things that we can look at over time. One of the most striking things when you go down to the Lincoln Museum is one of the first rooms that you walk into are all the cartoons that came out in the newspaper making fun of Abraham Lincoln in his
Right.
first year in office. And they're racist and horrifying and so derogatory toward the president. And I'd never seen it before until I went down there years ago. And it's striking to me that we felt like there had always been a decorum that's starting to fall apart now. And it's not true, that there are entire windows of time in which the president was treated horribly by the press and by the public and by other candidates. And I think we're moving back to that. And I don't know, you have
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We have a question. I want to get to some of the questions that people are giving us because we're actually getting a couple here. Do you ever think a candidate should be disqualified from a debate? If I could read, that would be good. Do you think a candidate would ever be disqualified from a debate for consistently breaking the rules? Dennis, what do you think?
I don't think so. I think ultimately the time slot's there for them. Ultimately, no. I at one point I thought that Biden's best case would be to step away from the podium for a moment. But no, I don't think that would happen.
So I love one of the modules that we have in this cycle is talking about late night parody and how influential not only Saturday Night Live was when it debuted in 1975, but also where the news shows, the news interview shows are, and and what I wondered was, since Saturday Night Live will be debuting on Saturday. And this is an exercise we actually have where we ask students to look at the debate, a historical debate, and then say, what do you think the characterization will be? What will be the parody? What is it that they will pick up on? Deborah, what do you think we'll see on Saturday Night Live with Jim Carrey and who's playing Donald Trump? I forgot. I should know this.
I forgot, but I definitely think that they'll showcase the chaos and maybe they'll, exaggerate the interruption. The sad part about it is that they're going to have a difficult job because this debate basically tried to put them out of work. They may lock in on some. They may lock in on some key phrases that came up. I raised my eyebrows when Biden said that I am the Democratic Party. So they could make hay out of that. They could create a riff off of not having any plans. And while taxes didn't come up as much as I thought it would, given the revelations that we just received, they could play off of that too.
Yeah. And here's the deal, Deborah. Here's the deal. And it is Alec Baldwin. I'm sorry that I forgot about that. Excuse me, Alec. I know you'll be sending me a note later today. but I like that idea of actually asking students, where would you see this going? How would you parody this? That allows them to take what happened and take it to a further extreme, which, Deborah, of course, you make the good point that it was pretty extreme anyway. But it allows them to do that. It allows them to think. And again, it allows them to criticize adults, which is not a bad thing to do in a structured place. In fact, it's a really good thing to do. It really gets you to think critically about what's coming next. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about the 6 topics. There was a struggle. It was supposed to be, very structured on this. And the 6 topics were the Trump and Biden records, the Supreme Court, COVID-19, the economy, race and violence in our cities, and the integrity of the election. The integrity of the election we got to at 9:28, I believe it was, 2 minutes before everything was supposed to stop. But do you think that there was any structure there in terms of covering this stuff that we got? Did we get any substance out of this?
Susie, I really like the section on COVID-19. And again, I keep on going back to the lesson plans, and so proud of the work of Greta Patrick and the entire team. The one on presidential debates and leadership, and it looks back at historical models, but then thinks about how you would respond in real time. And I think that's probably the area where many voters were looking and had responses to how they think President Trump and Vice President Biden probably came across the clearest in terms of their positions.
Yeah, well, it was Vice President Biden was he kept coming back to COVID-19. That is a strength for him to point out that there was no plan and that there was not and there isn't. But it was interesting. I am not sure where the response from President Trump came that if Biden were president, there would have been 2 million more dead. I'm not sure. Did any of you understand where that came from?
Not challenged at all. Maybe. Go ahead, Carol.
What?
Oh, I was going to say, so it's based on the statistic if we had done nothing. If we had done nothing, 2 million people would be dead. And so, it's driven out of this sort of core point that if we had just chosen to ignore the fact that there was a virus ever, 2 million people would have died by now, right? That was the whole point of the flattening the curve. And so the interpretation, that leap of faith that Trump is making is that Biden would have chosen to never acknowledge or manage the virus in any way. And if you did it that way, 2 million people would be dead. Wow. Is there any core of reality to the fact that a president of the United States, any president of the United States would have said, whatever, we're out? And again, going back to the lesson plan, one of the really interesting things when you look back is that you've got Wilson's response to the Spanish flu, which is shockingly similar to where we are today. And one of the things that he chose to do was not panic the public and not tell them about it. So in fact, there's a rally in Philadelphia, 15,000 people become ill afterwards, several thousand die. That we don't tend to learn from history. And this is one of the things that we know, of course, that if you don't actually understand it, you will repeat it. And in navigating the Spanish flu, which we had 3 rounds of in 3 years, people wore masks. They had to socially distance. We have done all this before. And it's really interesting to compare Wilson's administration and his response to today's administration, this response. And you can start to see some of the differences. And being able to look at that and looking at Roosevelt's response to something like polio, that there are really interesting intersectionalities between the way we've dealt with disease. And then you can also frame how do you work and Susie, you and I have talked about this. How do you work in a time of a single moment of crisis? 9/11, Pearl Harbor, right? And it's looking at the presidencies in those 2 terms and looking at what are legitimate decisions that take place in that window of time and where can you actually call somebody out on their decision-making process afterwards. And that's what we're looking at in this window.
So, and I would like to get on to the one subject here, which was race and violence in our cities, and that fact that it was those were even conflated together. Because race is, and we are here in Chicago, which I think is one of the epicenters of the civil rights, the resurgence of the civil rights movement, and where do we think we came out of anything with, I mean, that is such a difficult topic to talk to children about in so many different ways. Either you're telling them that there's just injustice in the world, it is that way, or what is it we think that we got out of today, and how can we educate our children with on the subject of race from this? Deborah, you already pointed out that again, bringing violence, the only topic for African Americans is racist in itself.
Well, I just think that this is a really great opportunity to talk about framing and the difference between asset framing and deficit framing. They definitely came from a deficit frame, both of them. And this would be a really great invitation to invite the students to contemplate their racial identity, their ethnic identity, and then to write about what's the full story, what's the 3-dimensional story about who they are and who their family is and where their people come from.
I love asset framing. It's a wonderful concept. Could you just flesh that out a little bit for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah. So asset framing presumes that we are not defining people by the worst possible thing that has ever happened to them. And so in the long history of journalism, we have defined historically stigmatized communities through a deficit frame by the worst thing that has ever happened to them. So being Black or being brown is equated always with crime or the need for more social control through policing, that sort of thing. It does not presume that people who live in marginalized communities also have hopes and dreams and who get up every morning to purpose themselves to a higher calling.
And
That's
I
all.
think when way back when I was at Public Narrative and we did a race and police specialized reporting institute, one of the things that we stressed is the majority of reporters, especially if you're in a large urban area, go into a neighborhood and you're only going in there at a time of of difficulty, at a time of trauma, and then to assume that that's normal, as opposed to actually trying to figure out what is normal in this neighborhood. Who are the important people in this neighborhood? What's going on? That's a really different way of reporting. I think pointing that out when you're looking at news stories, to be able to emphasize media literacy about what's being covered and how it's being covered, I think that is really vital and really important. We have a couple questions here. We're having some discussion on Facebook, so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at what the people are saying. And there's some discussion about whether Biden was dodging questions.
Not that wasn't something I registered. I think that one of the things that was really interesting, and again, if you go back and you watch it, it was that there were entire sections in which Trump is asked the first question and then Biden responds, and then eventually Chris would switch it up, but he seemed to default with more frequency to asking Trump first and then letting Biden respond. And so I think part of what you might have sensed as dodging questions, in fact, there was one question that he was supposed to ask both of them, and he never let Biden respond. At one point, Biden sort of tackled what Trump had said and then never actually got to answer the question itself. And I think some of that was the timing. I think some of that was the core chaos of the way the conversation was going, but I don't know that it was an intentional, I don't have an answer for that, because I think when you sort of picked apart what he was saying, he was working toward the answer of what the original question was.
Dennis, do you think Biden was dodging or Trump was dodging?
I think both didn't address questions directly. I think in the case of Biden, I think it was the question about would he be willing to pack the Supreme Court and eliminate the filibuster, which isn't really a fair question. And so he didn't answer it. In my view, I don't think it's a fair question. And I think President Trump also didn't answer a question. I think that that's part of the debate format is to go off into your own strength. So
Yeah,
I did note a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay, Deborah, I'm going to ask you the next question, which is, will we ever see an era of decorum return to presidential debates, or will future viewing listening audiences accept such vitriol as par for the course in an election season? Is this going to be the norm from here on in, do you think?
Right. I don't think that anybody knows anything because I don't think that any of us predicted that we would be in this moment. Who could predict that the economy would shut down and we would all be locked in our houses for months because if we went outside, we would get sick? It's something from a dystopian thriller. So, will we get out of this dystopian thriller? I don't know. In terms of the level of decorum, the floor definitely has been lowered. Um, I think that probably if you follow Carol's advice and look at the history of it, these things ebb and flow. So will the decorum return immediately? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think so. I think that that there's
Do
a
we need
huge part of
decorum?
the country that has appetite for this. Do we need decorum?
Do
We
we
need
need decorum?
decorum, but we need truth and we need authenticity, which is why we needed a better moderator to cut through the nonsense.
Yeah, there was
It's
an
not
awful
okay
lot
to
of.
answer like that. It's not okay to answer the race question the way that they answered it, and to let it go, or to ask the question and say, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. For me, and the way that I walk through society every day, that is the question all day, every day. And it's not okay to cycle through to another answer.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's a great point to bring out to students, because it went by so quick. And being able to notice, one of the things that the broadcast media normally do is they'll pick out moments. So we'll pick out moments to what is emblematic of this whole debate. And I worry that that will not be a moment, and it should be a moment, because it is. It went by so quickly, and it was almost something that you might not even notice. But things like, the clown comment, things like when he said, "Shut up, man," which is, those will be the visual moments or the audio moments that we hear. We are actually gone over. We are doing exactly what they did, but I wanted to kind of wrap this up. We promised that it would only be 30 minutes, and it's a little bit longer. And I would love each of you to kind of give us final thoughts on what you think when you're talking to educators out there and we're talking to teachers. Where do we go next? How is it we can set these our kids and our students up as they're looking at this election? Because I think it's going to be a very, very long, short period of time, and what can we ask them to look at and to maybe do to really help them get engaged in all of this? I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to move down my screen, and I'm going to start with Mr. Dennis up there.
So I'm going to kind of wrap to where you started, which is, at the university and in education in general, I think civic engagement and critical thinking are cornerstones. I think the tools that are available through the greatdebates.org and the role of the Museum of Broadcast Communication is really important, because what we're talking about here is media literacy, and we need to see some models out there to see to be able to place this on a spectrum. And as Deb so rightly points out, this was outside of the norm by a long way. And so I think that's where we would start. I think there's tools here for educators and anybody who's interested in learning more can go look at, because media literacy is so important.
It is so important. So, Miss Deborah.
I would like to invite students to contemplate what's at stake and what's at stake for them and their families, and maybe deconstruct a particular issue that is really important to them as individuals, and presuming that they're experts in their own lives. And I think that we need to, generate discussions around, what do you do when you need to cut through the noise and focus and get something done? This reminded me of when I was a kid, and my aunt left us in her South Shore apartment all day one day with a big grease bucket full of coins and said, "Here, sit here and count these." I thought it was really dumb, but I took it very seriously. My cousins didn't, so they kept throwing coins in my pile. And my cousins joke to this day that I have a high degree of focus, and that's why I'm successful in life, because I always just cut out the noise. So how do you walk kids through a process of critical thinking to cut out the noise and focus on what really matters if everything were at stake?
These are both great. Thank you so much. And Carol?
All right, so I'm going to build off of what Deb said and what Dennis said. And I think that the thing that's really critical is understanding the connection between media literacy, civic engagement, and then civic activism. And I think one of the things that we can help students understand is take any one of the topics, whatever resonated with you as a student, race, the Supreme Court, civil rights, whatever those things are. Look at what the candidates did say, look at what they didn't say, come up with what it is you would like them to understand about your viewpoint, and then write to them. That one of the things that we really have to do, particularly for students in high school, is make them understand that their engagement with the civic discourse of elected officials does not begin with voting. It begins with your voice going to them about what it is you believe and what it is you want them to understand about your life, and that you can do that well before you turn 18. And that's one of the things that teachers can help them understand is you are empowered to communicate with your elected officials right now. And that's one of the things that can come out of this debate is look at what you didn't hear and what you wanted to hear, and then go tell them.
Well, I love this suggestion, and I am so grateful to the three of you for being here, and I'm grateful for all of you who've joined us tonight. I know it's been a very long day for everybody. If you're a parent and an educator, it's been a really long day. So we really hope that you know that greatdebates.org is a site. It's free. All of the curriculum is free, the 8 modules. We're going to continue to add. We are adding modules in the next 2 to 3 weeks on the Supreme Court, on race, as well as on measuring leadership, a little bit deeper dive than the one we have out there already about COVID. So I would love you to join us in, and please send me a note, and that's SSCHULTZ at museum.tv, or do it here on our Facebook page about what you would like to see. And if you see anything on the site that you don't particularly like, or that you think that is wrongheaded, or you have any other suggestions about resources we could include, again, send me a note, pop me give me a call, or drop it in on Facebook. And thank you all very much for joining us tonight.